Well there. Brent here with Bring Your Own Tools. On today's episode, we're going to be remodeling this entire master bathroom. If you want to know how to do it, keep on watching. Let's get started. To some of you, you might be telling yourself this is a perfectly fine bathroom. Why would you remodel this bathroom? Well, that is, in all honesty, correct. There's nothing wrong with this bathroom. There's just a lot going on. Different fixtures, different finishes. This was personally the second bathroom I ever remodeled, and I want to get creative and different with the tile, but it just really didn't work out from my perspective. So, since my wife has been asking for a master bathroom remodel for literally years now, I figured I would finally step up to the plate and give her the bathroom remodel of her dreams. She gave me some much needed pointers along with noting exactly what truly needed to go.
It's gotta go. I've lived with it for long enough.
It's beautiful.
Lived with it for long enough.
It works.
Nope.
There's a fan and a light.
This is technically the first time I've ever remodeled anything in my entire construction career. I've been extremely proud of how I've remodeled this entire house, but for some reason this one bathroom has never come to fruition as to the style and aesthetic that I was originally looking for, so it might be painful for me to remove all the hard work that I have done thus far. I'm still obliged to do it because I really don't like the overall look. Plus, the old adage does go, happy wife, happy life, so let's oblige accordingly. Luckily for me, with this beautiful beadboard, I was able to remove it very quickly because the majority of it was installed with just nails and a little bit of construction adhesive, not much. And just for good measure, with any interior construction project, I always advise knowing exactly where your water shutoff valve is, especially if it's a bathroom remodel. It's not only important in case of an emergency, but it also makes the demo portion even easier.
That's disgusting. Ugh. We need a quality silicone for that when we reinstall it.
Let's be honest, that was an early plug for the sponsor this week, GE, but a well worth plug because when I first installed this toilet years ago, I apparently forgot to apply a quality silicone, and therefore there was some disgusting nature underneath the toilet where we wouldn't have that problem if we did apply a proper amount of silicone at the base. Once all of our beadboard is fully removed, we can then reinstall our plumbing fixtures to make sure that we can turn the water back on, and now that we protected our house from not flooding, we need to protect our floors. The marble floors that I originally installed in this bathroom really did turn out quite well for my opinion, and since my wife and I both agree that they are aesthetically pleasing, we're going to keep them, but we have to protect them due to all the chaos that's going to happen during the demolition and remodel of the shower tub area. And speaking of protection, since we are keeping our tub, I am going to be protecting the entire rim of the tub along with applying some type of visqueen around it, so there's much less chance of any damage during the demolition portion of the project. Plus, I always advise applying some type of scrap OSB, plywood, or so forth around the perimeter of the tub so any of those large tile debris items fall mainly on the board and not the tub itself. When it comes to demoing, my favorite tool is a reciprocating saw, but my second favorite demolition tool is the hammer drill. This thing makes quick work of any demolition tile project, and there's so many uses for it. In this application, I'm using a 3-inch wide scaling chisel, which works out quite well when removing tile or even thinset. It's basically just a mini jackhammer that you're using around the entire perimeter to remove all the tile, but keep in mind that you're also able to be very accurate with this tool because I want to salvage all of the cement board behind it, and it's not damaging any of that cement board along the way. On your project, if you do come into a situation where you have to remove the walls along with replacing the plumbing, I do have videos for that, and it is surprisingly a very straightforward process, so if you're in need of that, I will make sure and have a link for that video in the description box below. One thing I wanted to keep in mind in particular on this project is to make sure everything was extremely easy to find on this project. In particular, tools and materials. So any tool or material that you see in this video, I will make sure that it's perfectly easy to find in the description box below of this video, whether it's the large hammer drill I'm using at this point or even the tile and silicone that I'll be using at the tail end of this project, it will all be listed below. With any home remodeling project, it is always going to be a slight guessing game of what you're going to do once you're done with the demolition portion. And during the process of removing the tile, I realized that this panel was damaged. Yep, as you can see, good thing I removed it because there was black mold growing on the back side of it. Not good, and did a bit more investigating to the point where I realized there was some slight 2x4 discoloration at this location as well. Therefore, I removed even more cement board to make sure this one stud was addressed one way or the other, whether it was mold or not. For simple surface cleaning like this, I'm going with a rapid clean remediation product by Mold Armor. It does an extremely good job, and you can literally see it work in mere minutes. And it goes without saying, but let's say it anyways, make sure you're wearing a proper respirator and eye protection along with some safety gloves while you're doing any portion of demolition, especially if there's a potential mold intrusion issue. When we get to tiling, I'll discuss a bit more about where this water intrusion came from, but till then, let's get this area wrapped up. I'm using a different type of cement board which has hydro defense, which apparently is more waterproof in these applications. Not sure if that's truly the case, but might as well be more safe than sorry. You do want to try and avoid cutting this material whenever possible because you don't want to breathe this stuff in, but if you do have to cut it, just make sure you're wearing some type of proper respirator. And make sure when you're cutting that you are cutting in an outdoor application if possible. I place our panel back into position, screw it down with cement board fasteners, and once that's taken care of, along with all the other pieces of cement board in place, we need to give our seams a bit of love with some seam tape. Now this is cement board seam tape, which is different than your general run-of-the-mill drywall seam tape. This is being placed anywhere where a board edge is meeting another board edge, and once installed, it's time to mix up some Thinset. You can use many different types of Thinset for this application, but my preferred version is the fast drying version because I do want this to dry fast so I can apply a waterproof membrane over the top of it in the same day. Pro tip when mixing is you always apply your water first before you apply your Thinset mix. That way you can significantly avoid dry clumps at the bottom of your pail when mixing. You apply this mix directly over the seams, and a 6-inch joint knife is a perfect way to apply this product quickly and evenly. Now none of these joints have to be perfectly smooth, but you do want a nice transition from edge to edge. Now I did tell my wife that this is going to be a show-stopping bathroom remodel, so in order to take it to the next level, we are going to be applying tile across the entire vanity wall. Only one problem with that though. Just like basically any remodel, you're going to come into some certain unique circumstances. I had one in the shower because we ran into some mold issues, and of course some of this paint, yes, the paint is just peeling off, and there is white here, so I do believe that I applied some type of drywall primer, which is what you should be doing before you apply your paint. But for some reason this is just peeling off. And obviously I don't want to apply tile to the surface if I'm able to easily peel off the paint itself. You never know what's going to happen over the years. So inevitably I'm going to try and remove as much of this paint as I can before we get this area prepped for tile. Oh yeah. This is kind of satisfying though. I originally did this bathroom remodel back in 2011, so in all honesty, I really can't remember whether or not I used a drywall primer at that point or not. I assume so since there is white paint on the back side of the peeled off paint, but you never know, and for some reason it only happened in areas where I did a large sizable drywall patch prior to remodeling it back in 2011, so that I'm sure was partially to blame, and maybe the drywall mud was just not fully cured before I applied the paint. As for the remaining paint that is adhered properly, I did decide to grab my grinder with a sanding disc and just abraded the surface as much as I felt was necessary. I'm sure this was overkill, but I really wanted a surface for our waterproofing membrane to be applied to that we didn't have any issues of sticking whatsoever. After I completed the abrading process, I did grab some TSP with a water solution and wiped down all those painted walls to make sure that any grease and grime that was left on those walls was completely removed at this point. It's now finally time for our RedGuard waterproofing membrane, and if you haven't seen this before, it's just a huge vat of bubblegum. I know it looks like that, but it's basically just an extremely thick paint that we're applying to all of our wall surfaces. I find that the easiest way to apply this product is just taking a chip brush and going over all of the inside corners with a brush, along with any plumbing holes or fixtures that might be a little bit more difficult to apply product to with a roller. The vast majority of all these walls will be applied with a roller, and for the roller, I'm using a 6-inch woven mini roller. You don't want to use one of those foam rollers because the foam rollers just don't pick up this thick material as well as the actual woven one, so keep that in mind. And I'm sure a standard size paint roller would work in this application as well, but I had these mini ones on hand and it literally took me probably 20 minutes to do the entire rolling process for this entire room. So just know that ahead of time, and also know that you don't want to apply this product too thick. If you apply it too thick, then it's more likely to peel. So make sure you just have a nice consistent thin coat, and you do want to apply 2 coats. Yes, 2 coats in any areas where they have consistent moisture in them, like the shower. You don't have to do 2 coats on walls that are not going to be in contact with a significant amount of moisture. So the one by the vanity, I'm not going to do 2 coats to, but I am going to apply 2 coats to the shower tub area.
Second coat is on. Let's let it dry and then we can get to tile.
If there is one tool to have on hand for this project to make life so much easier on yourself, it is going to be the laser level. Yes, the laser level is going to come in extremely handy on this project because you have to guarantee that everything is lining up properly in a horizontal fashion as well as in a vertical position. On this project, I'm going to be using 3 different types of shims. They're all very important in different ways, which I'll go into, but just know that these 3 are going to be used. Number 1 mainly is going to be this one, which is a rigid 1/8 inch spacer. These ones are 3/16 of an inch flexible spacers, and these ones are a unique wedge-shaped spacer. Again, as we're installing, I'll go into more detail on how I'm using them, but those are the 3 that we'll be using on this project. It's now finally time to start mixing up some Thinset so we can install some of these tiles. I'm using the Pro Light version Thinset, which is a lighter Thinset than most Thinsets out there, which in all honesty I don't really care too much about, but I do care about the fact that it has a very high bond strength, as well as it just feels more smooth when applying it to the wall or to the tile from my perspective. The first row of application is always extremely important because everything is going to be working off of this first row, and if you screw up the first row and it's already uneven at that point, then all your other rows are going to be much more difficult to install and look correct. The tub surround is quite level, so that was a nice added bonus on this project, but there was a slight high spot at this corner, which is exactly why I wanted to start in this specific corner. If I have to adjust the shims at the very bottom, I always can with the wedge shims, but with this first row, I am using these soft 3/16 of an inch thick shims in between the base of the tile and the tub. Once we have a good set of tiles installed, I start implementing the rigid 1/8 inch shim. Now these shims are very important in this application because they're embedded shims. Therefore, I can push this shim right into the Thinset, and after all of our Thinset is dry, I can then immediately grout right over them, which saves quite a bit of time when you think of just the removal process of all these shims if I had to. Eventually, no matter what, you're going to get to a point where you have to cut these shims, and in this application, we're going to need to drill into our first tile. And these tiles are glossy ceramic subway tiles, which is a nice thing because they are quite easy to drill and cut into. Just make sure you have a proper drill bit that is rated to go into ceramic. There are plenty of diamond hole saws that can do the same exact thing, but I am using a 1-inch thick drill bit. With our tiles snugly in position, I can move on and finish this first row, but before I move on to the next adjacent side, I want to make sure that we have one vertical row going all the way up, because this may be subway tile, but we're going to be implementing a vertical stacking pattern, and it's really important to make sure that we have a perfectly plumb and level surface to work off of, because we're going to be going over this entire wall with tile. Plus, in my research, it does seem like if you do stack tile this way, it opens up the room even more and makes the room feel bigger, which is important because this is not the biggest master bathroom you've ever seen. With one vertical row in place, I leave that alone and move on to the next adjacent tub side. I'm double checking that these tiles are perfectly plumb first, and once I like the positioning, I can readjust my level to make sure that each one of these tiles is lining up at the very top. As I noted previously, every single material and tool that's seen in this video is going to be fully available online, and that also includes the tile itself, which comes from a company called Apparel Tile. This is a silken green, approximately 2.5 inch by 16 inch glossy ceramic subway tile, and the color itself is tea green. I think it's going to be really beautiful in the end. I know it doesn't look super green, but there is a really nice green tint to it, which you'll be able to see later on in the video. It's finally time to bust out our wet saw, and with a wet saw it is always easier to make your marks on some type of tape, so I do apply the tape first to the tile, then make my marks, and then use our wet saw accordingly. Once this first piece is cut and placed in nicely, I can take a measurement off of the wall and make that secondary cut as well. I always suggest either making a mark on both sides of the tile or just striking a line all the way down the center of it to make sure that cut stays even all the way down. And remember, the cut side is going to be the sides that are going up against your walls, not against the adjacent tile. On our project, we do have a unique ledge system on one side of the tub, which has worked out in the past since it's just a perfect area to hold all of our soaps, but definitely makes the tiling process more cumbersome since I now need to start installing some tile trim. This is aluminum tile trim that's powder coated black, and I go about the process of cutting one side at a 45-degree angle, then noting how long our second piece of trim needs to be, cut that piece at another 45-degree angle on one side, and I'm now ready to lay it into place. An ample amount of thinset is applied to the edge, and then I lay that piece of metal trim directly into the thinset, trying to just squish it down into place. By putting an ample amount there, it basically just solidifies it quite nicely and holds it somewhat still. You can obviously still adjust it as needed, and you do have to be careful, but you want to have a nice thick mortar bed so movement is minimal. Once our trim is in position, I start making a few measurements, and it's now time to cut a few tiles down to size, applying a heavy amount of thinset on the back side and smushing them into place. A key item to remember while applying these tiles is to make sure that they're not perfectly level. You want them angled downward towards the tub because any water that's going to be hitting this area, you want to make sure and guarantee that it's running down towards the tub and not the back wall. Once I like the positioning of all these tiles, I let them dry overnight, come back to them the next day, take a few measurements, and start installing those secondary layer of tiles. I did it this way because it's much easier to apply the second layer of tiles if you're working off of tiles that are fully cemented into place. This way I can use the bottom row as leverage and I don't have to ever worry about those tiles moving on me during the second row of installation. I'm going to come back to this row after the thinset is dry, but till then, let's make our way back to the shower side. The row below the second layer of tiles is fully solidified, so it's extremely easy to start laying all these tiles out. I just need to make sure that our spacers that can be embedded into our thinset is being positioned properly and they're not sticking too far out, as well as making sure that all of our tiles are installed in a plumb and level fashion. However, if you find that those embedded shims are just sticking out a little too far, you can always take a flat-headed screwdriver and just push them back into the thinset after the tile is installed. Just try and do this before the thinset is dry. As a helpful side note when it comes to thinset application, I would be normally back buttering the tile itself and then using my notched trowel on the wall. I'm doing the opposite as you see here, but that's for good reason because the wall went through a demolition portion and it wasn't perfectly flat due to leftover Thinset. I figured it'd be much better to back butter the wall and then apply our Thinset to the back side of our tile with a notched trowel, which definitely added more time to this entire project, but for good reason. On your project, if you are working off of a bare flat wall, I would just back butter the tile and use the notched trowel on your wall. That will definitely save you time in the long run. As we make our way to the corner tile, slight adjustments did need to be made, like grinding down one side of the tile to make sure that that uneven corner didn't affect how that tile was going to be laid down. As I move on to the adjacent side, the really nice thing of utilizing that laser level already was that I really don't have to use it very often at this point. I have the course at the bottom perfectly leveled and laid out. I have the course on the right side perfectly leveled and laid out. This way I can just concentrate on applying Thinset properly, and I double check my plumbness occasionally, but not very often. Unless you get really lucky, you're going to have to cut one of these sides down, which I do, but luckily for me it wasn't super thin because I don't want any pieces under a 1/2 inch generally, and this is probably a little closer to 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches. As I make my way up to the third and final side of the tub surround, I need to finish the lower section of tile first. The same aluminum tile trim is being placed on the downward section at this location, and once our trim is solidified, I can start bringing in our tile. Now this is a bit of a tricky corner because I still want a transition that matches up with the grout lines that we're going to have on the opposite side of the shower. Therefore, I bring in the laser level and position that accordingly whilst cutting all these pieces to the appropriate size. Just remember that you should have a grout line at the top and the bottom of each one of these tiles. You don't want the tiles to be butting right up against your aluminum trim because you won't be able to seal them properly if you do so. I make my way around our metal trim, still acknowledging a nice proper grout line with our shims, and make my way all the way down to the bottom. Now the transition from our tile to our floor still needs to have a slight gap because we are going to be installing some silicone at these locations because we do anticipate movement over time here versus the grout lines. There was a bit of a unique circumstance where I had to do a plunge cut, but it was a bit of a thick plunge cut, so I had to make multiple cuts here along with smoothing out that edge while still holding a flashlight pinned to my neck because it was getting so dark and it wasn't very late, but you know, here in the Pacific Northwest it gets pitch black at 5 p.m. With that one piece of tile in place, I'm able to squeeze in a piece of aluminum trim on the back side, and that gives me a nice template for exactly where all the other tile pieces need to line up above it and below it. With one side of the room completed, I can now make my way back to the opposite side of the room and start finishing off this wonderful large wall of tile. There's a bit of an uneven transition at this location, but the nice and easy way to fix that is just to apply more Thinset on the back side of your tile. You can always remove any excess that squirts out, but it's nice to know that you have a solidified tile because you have plenty of Thinset on the back side. I can also acknowledge that I'm applying a stack of tile at the very base of all of these tiles that I'm installing. It's just going to be there as support because I don't want to go all the way down to the ground as of yet. I want to have a nice fluid piece there, let that dry, and then come back to those smaller pieces at a later date or just install wall base. Keep in mind that those uneven terrain areas at the very base where I stacked those tiles is a perfect area to use our wedge shims because each one of those base tiles needs to be slightly adjusted up or down one way or the other, and with those wedge shims you're easily able to do so just by pushing the shim towards the wall or away from the wall. Now I believe this speaks for itself, but I'll say it anyways. The size of the tile really does make a significant difference when considering the time it will take to install, because the smaller the tile, the more time consuming it is, but the larger the tile, the easier it's going to be. Within reason, of course. Now, a quick item of advice before we do anything else is the fact that don't forget to figure out where your stud placement is located. Yes, that is of course important. And you don't want to screw that one up. and forget about it, because if you don't know where your studs are, that cabinet that we're going to be installing after this is going to be a lot harder to install. So please keep that in mind. Just like anything, the more practice you have, the faster you're going to be able to do it. And by the time I got to this wall, I was going jet fast because I started using a large 24-inch wide drywall skimming knife for the back buttering on the wall. And then I started laying out many tiles at once and then smushing them down evenly with a level to make sure that they were all evenly distributed across the entire wall. In all honesty, I've done a lot of tiling in my life, but I've never tiled a wall where it didn't need to be tiled, and this is exactly the situation that I'm talking about. This whole wall doesn't need to be tiled, but for aesthetic purposes, I am doing so. Let me know in the comment section if you think this was actually worth it. Personally, for me, I think it's going to be, especially when you see the finished product, because it is quite beautiful, if I do say so myself. Eventually I came to the point where I met up with the electrical box for our light, and you may be wondering yourself, how do you cut a circle in your tile? It's not the easiest thing, but it certainly doesn't take too much skill as long as you have a grinder with a 4.5-inch diamond blade, because all I have to do is apply a bit of pressure with my grinder on that tile and it immediately starts cutting. I just have to be careful of cutting right on the line that I drew. It's not the prettiest cut in the world, but it doesn't have to be, because the light trim that's going to be going around that outlet is going to be covering up that entire area. With our top row fully installed, I make my way outside and cut some very slender, lengthy pieces of tile that will finish up this entire wall of installation. It's all in the detail work, and even these small areas, which will most likely be seen by very few people, it's still important in my book, so please take your time and know that it's all going to pay off in the end. If you're able to do a bit of cleanup the same day, that is always preferable, but if not, make sure you get to clean up the very next morning, because the longer this Thinset sits around, the harder it's going to be to remove. If there's small bits of Thinset on the inside of your tile, my favorite tool is just to take a utility blade and score it down both sides of the tile, which basically just knocks off any loose pieces of Thinset that might be close to the front edge of your tile. With our tile completely cleaned up, it's finally time to remove this excess protection on our tub and then immediately go to applying another layer of tape. And that's because we're going to be applying a high quality silicone all the way around the tub. Now this is because we want to make sure that we're not actually using a grout at this location. We want some type of high quality seal around the tub, as well as any corners where walls meet adjacent walls. We do this for a number of reasons, but most specifically is that these areas are definitely going to be the more prone areas to moisture intrusion, so we want to make sure that we have a higher quality seal at these locations, along with the fact that these areas are more prone to movement. So if this was a standard grout line, you would most likely see some hairline fractures over the years of use, and that could lead to water intrusion. For purposes of much easier cleanup, I am applying tape to any areas where I'm going to be applying this silicone to, because as you can imagine, with a high quality silicone, it can stick to almost mere anything, so we want to make sure there's a very easy way to clean up all the excess. As I apply my silicone, you may notice that there's not a smooth, consistent bead all the way across, and that's for good reason. I'm not just a rookie at this, because I'm trying to fill that gap right underneath the tile, and it is a sizable gap, so you do have to apply a bit of pressure at every single 1/4 inch to make sure that that bead is fully sealed, so you never have to worry about a weak point within your bead. Once our silicone is applied, because we have our tape in these locations, I'm able to use my finger and just swipe off all the excess and have a nice smooth finish around all these corners. At this point in time, it is a perfect opportunity to say a huge thank you to the sponsor of this week's video, GE. I've literally used their products for decades, and the fact that they personally reached out to me and wanted to be a sponsor on the BYOT platform meant quite the world to me, with the fact that I've known and trusted their product for so long. One of the main reasons why they're sponsoring the channel is because there is new and improved packaging. Same exact product, whether it's the old packaging or new packaging, but you might notice a difference in the near future whether you're purchasing from your local retailer or an online store. Key items to note is that their silicones are 100% waterproof, shrink and crack proof, water ready within 30 minutes, and their Supreme lineup is lifetime mold free guaranteed. If you want to check out their amazing product line for yourself, I created their own Amazon storefront on the BYOT page, so if you're interested, please check out the link in the description box below. After our silicone is fully applied, I let it tack up for approximately 5 to 10 minutes and then come back around and remove all the tape. I don't want to wait for the silicone to completely dry before I get to removing the tape, mainly because I want to make sure that that tape is very easy to remove so we have a nice crisp edge from the silicone to the tile or the silicone to the tub. With our silicone fully dry, it's finally time for some grout. And for our grout, we're going to be going with this sanded grout that notes the coloring as Arctic white, which is basically as white as I could possibly find, which matches quite well with our white silicone. As for application of our grout, I'm going to be using a standard rubber grout float, just trying to be mindful of pushing that grout in as deep as I possibly can. This is definitely the time where you are thinking to yourself, why didn't I go with a larger tile? Because if you went with larger tiles, you have much less grout lines to worry about. But inevitably, we went with this product, which I still think is going to pay off greatly in the end. It's just a matter of noting that it's going to take a little extra time due to all of the grout lines throughout this entire bathroom. With most wall tile projects, I tend to work from the bottom up and just feel like that's a little bit easier to manage and work with when trying to manage getting that grout into every single crack and crevice. As you can see here, I'm using a sponge along with a large 5-gallon bucket of water. Now you are going to have to do multiple passes of cleaning, but to make that process even faster, I brought in the BYOT labor team. Yeah, this is all hands on deck at this point, trying to make sure that this tile looks as clean and beautiful as humanly possible, but I did have to let the team go eventually at a certain point because they were just getting a little too rowdy since they were drinking on the job. They were drinking milk, of course, but they were still getting pretty rowdy. The grouting process is somewhat tedious, but it really is one of the more satisfying aspects of a home bathroom remodel because it really brings that tile to life. Before this, it looks good, but it really doesn't look finished until you have those grout lines fully filled, and at this point, yes, it does take hours to do, but certainly minimal in comparison to how much time it took to lay the tile itself. In order to keep our sponges as clean as possible, I bring in a second 5-gallon bucket. I wash the sponge out in one bucket and I dip the sponge into the second bucket, but I rinse that sponge out still in that first bucket. That basically provides you the least amount of contamination in the second bucket and hopefully gives you the cleanest sponge you can ask for. But with our tile fully grouted, I'm proud to say that we are done with part 1 of this bathroom remodel. To what it was before to what it is now is something that I'm truly proud of and something I can't wait to show you what the finished product is going to look like, along with hopefully an amazing reaction video for my wife. We obviously know that the bathroom is not fully done yet, but the vast majority of all of our hard work has been completed. We just need to get to all the finer things in life, like a vanity and a toilet, of course, to make this actually a bathroom. But till then, this is still truly one beautiful, sexy beast. Oh yeah,